1.
Good afternoon. We are here on October 7th. It is a Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee meeting. We're here with two items on our agenda, starting with the zoning text amendment 2404, which is dormitory and community service retail CSS overlay zone. This is part of the implementation of the Tacoma Park minor master plan. Let me turn it over to council staff.
Good afternoon. So a public hearing was held on September 17th, 2024. There was only one speaker from the planning department. We received all the required impact statements. The planning board transmitted the ZTA, so of course recommended supporting it. The climate assessment found no new impacts because there was a very thorough climate assessment done for the plan itself. The RESJ impact statement from OLO was positive, noting that this would disproportionately benefit BIPOC persons in need of student housing, as well as positively impact racial equity and social justice in the county. So going into the details, the Tacoma Park Minor Master Plan Amendment was adopted by the council on April 2nd. It had several goals, including new and improved uses for existing spaces and places, reconnected community with improved, safe, inviting ways to park, shop, and live at home, and then as a resilient community as well. That master plan had two recommendations that specifically required a ZTA. The first one, as noted, is to make dormitories a limited use. Interestingly, in the use table, there was only one zone that allowed dormitories, which was LSC. So what the ZTA would do is allow dormitories as limited use in the CR zone as well as the CRN zone. For the plan specifically, this is to allow the Adventist campus to develop dormitories, and a site plan would be required for that. The second thing the ZTA does is remove the CSR overlay zone. The reason being that it's somewhat obsolete given the new overlay zones that apply to this area. One amendment that council staff wanted to note is the master plan actually recommended removing both the CSR zone and the TPESS, which is the Tacoma Park East Silver Spring Commercial Revitalization. So what council staff would recommend is that the committee make sure that that zone is removed as well. So what will happen in terms of formatting is that zone will be added back into the ZTA so that it can be bracketed out. I will note in going through this in much line-by-line detail that we have ZTA 2403 was introduced but has not had work session yet and is also going to renumber a lot of these overlay zones. So there will be it'll look like some funny formatting, but it's mostly reserving sections so that if that ZTA gets reviewed and adopted, we don't have to renumber things 2 to 3 times.
Okay, thank you. Anything else to add? Any concerns or questions otherwise raised? If not, without objection, I think we can accept the staff recommendation and approve as recommended. All right. Approved as recommended. All right, we're going to move on to the second item on our agenda, which is the third work session on the 2024 to 2028 growth and infrastructure policy. The committee's September 16th work session covered the planning board's recommendations for school adequacy and testing and the first 7 recommendations related to transportation adequacy. We met on the 23rd, covered the planning board's 12 GIP recommendations related to transportation adequacy, and today we're going to cover the remaining school and transportation recommended that were not voted on. I just want to express appreciation. We had a good back and forth conversation. Staff worked together and were able to flesh out a couple of the items of outstanding questions and interest, and I believe we have some recommendations before us that we'll decide on today. I'm glad we took the extra time to do that and appreciate the work that went into that. And with that, let me turn it over to Ms. Dunn and council staff to walk us through the outstanding items and the staff recommendations.
Great, thank you. As you noted, we have already held a work session on the school portion of the growth and infrastructure policy, and during that we talked about the very first recommendation, which is 2.1, and we noted that there were several fundamental changes to the administration of the annual school test and adequate public facility rules that took place in the 2020 Growth and Infrastructure Policy. And one such change was the creation of the school impact areas. It created a classification to classify geographic areas of the county as either turnover, infill, or greenfield. And with this Growth and Infrastructure Policy, there are recommended changes to the way those classifications are being done, the methodology and the results. So you'll see on page 2 of the staff report, one of the conversations we had at the first work session was looking at the comparison of the geographic basis for doing that classification in the 2020. It was primarily census tract or aggregations of census tracts that then were placed in planning areas versus the 2024 Growth and Infrastructure Policy, which has recommended using the transportation policy areas as that geographic basis for making those classifications across the county. And so if you'll see on page 2, the planning staff have worked to provide a comparison that looks at the 2020 boundaries versus the 2024 boundaries, but using the 2024 methodology. And the reason we, and they chose that methodology, the most recent one, was it was more difficult to go back to the original data and methodology from 4 years ago and recreate what they are currently recommending for the boundaries. So you'll see the results again at the bottom of page 2, and what you'll note is that that for both maps, the red transportation policy areas have been classified as infill. This is per the 2020 Growth and Infrastructure Policy, again a recommendation for this one. And in addition, the Planning Board had approved classifying 2 impact areas that had initially been classified as greenfield to turnover because the resulting areas had insufficient data to give a reliable student generation rate. Again, these classifications become a basis for those student generation rates that help determine whether an area is or isn't adequate and also go into the impact tax derivation. So if you look at the top of page 3, making note of those changes for the red transportation policy areas being classified as infill and the greenfield written over as well, you'll see the comparison of the council requested 2020 boundary and the planning board recommended 2024 boundaries shown at the top of the page. If you look closer, so it may look at first glance that possibly the one with the 2020 boundaries would be better. It has all 3 area types being classified. However, if you look more closely at the data, and this became evident to the planning staff, the larger geographic boundary doesn't capture some of the nuances of growth that they're trying to capture with the indices that make up these classification systems. And if you look at North Bethesda, for example, what you'll see is that using the 2020 boundaries, the housing growth index in the Rock Spring area is captured, but it classifies the entire North Bethesda area, because again, it's using a larger geography, as high housing growth, but is comprised of mainly single family. So it gets classified as greenfield when in fact, when you separate out Rock Spring, as it would happen in the 2024 use of boundaries, Rock Spring is treated as it actually is growing, which is more as an infill type of growth, and the remaining part of North Bethesda gets classified as a low housing growth area, which basically is influenced more by turnover in the current housing stock. If you look, Clarksburg has a similar experience. The 2020 boundary combines all 3 policy areas in Clarksburg into one larger area. The 2024 boundaries make a distinction between Clarksburg West, Clarksburg East, and Clarksburg Town Center. So council staff believes that the nuances, again, captured by these smaller geographic areas, especially in our more dense areas of the county, provide a better projective tool of what's going to happen and provide a better basis for classifying an area as whether it will act as an area with primarily turnover growth or primarily infill development in the coming years when we do our annual school test.
Appreciate it. Can open up to comments. I'll just say this is a more in-depth and granular view of what we started to talk about at the last committee work session. So I appreciate the efforts undertaken here by staff to really look into what this means. I think the 2 examples in North Bethesda and in up county, as well as, two different contexts, but actually similar results when you go granular. It was very interesting to look at. See if colleagues have any questions or comments.
And this is Natalie Fanny Gonzalez. Thank you for all your work. And then just to clarify, this is something that also the planning department, and the planning board is on board with council staff, right?
Yes, I would actually say, and so planning staff did the analysis that created the maps that you're looking at, and it was the planning board's recommendation to use the more fine-grained transportation analysis.
It does make sense. Yeah, thank you so much.
Council staff is agreeing with the planning board recommendation here, based on, and with further analysis that justifies it, essentially. Let me turn it over to Councilman.
You're just talking about the map. Now, we're going to get to how it's, because I thought we had talked about last time what the fiscal impact would be. And
So we do have some information on that.
I didn't see it.
Have some slides. Again, and what I would say is typically the boundaries match for both transportation, for both impact taxes and the annual school test. And for schools, that's helpful because when you are testing an area to see whether it requires a utilization premium payment, that becomes a surcharge off the impact tax. But here again, we were trying very hard to focus on what are the rules, what is the best evaluation and methodology for the rules for adequate public evaluation in the annual school test, regardless of its impact on the fiscal bottom line. But what we do have are some slides also that were created by planning staff to answer that question.
Yeah, because that, just to be clear, that was a key question that I know I asked last time, and I didn't see it covered, but glad we're going to talk about it now.
Hey, Sue, do you want to?
So the question is, what is the anticipated fiscal impact of aligning the school impact boundary areas with the transportation policy boundary areas? I understand the rationale being given for doing so, but
Let me just, do you want to talk, see if she wants to talk to these?
just press the button.
For the record, Jesus Beck, Adequate Public Facilities Planner, Countywide Division at the Planning Department. So with the limited time we had to do more of a modeling type fiscal impact analysis. There were certain things that we decided to overlook because this is basically comparing two different options, not comparing to a different year revenue.
Not in the packet.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how are we going to make sure that this is seen by the public?
I'll create an addendum following today and I'll add it to the packet.
Great.
So what we're seeing right now is using the units, the projects currently in the pipeline, and setting up a, I guess, unit type mix. We for a simple, quick analysis, we didn't have exactly how many units were single family detached versus attached. We had the number of single family units. We had the number of multifamily units without knowing how many were high rise or low rise. So we set up like a model for which ones, how many units are single family detached, attached, low rise, high rise, with the locations. So whenever we change the boundaries, the total numbers stay the same. We're not, so when the boundaries change, the proportion of units in each impact area type might change, and that's what we're seeing in the differences. The other thing that we didn't consider is the cap and carryover system, because that would in a way kind of change the impact, the difference. We just wanted to see the pure difference. And then again, for time reason, we didn't use the multiple discounts and MPDUs, but they should be applied in each, both scenarios. We're using the same assumptions in that regard. So the main comparison is, what does the boundary do? Everything else we kept the same. So we shouldn't be looking at the total numbers and comparing it to previous revenues. This is just to compare the two numbers from, I guess, A compared to B, or A dash compared to B. Right now we're showing A as the 2020 boundary, showing with the greenfield impact area classifications. And without even having to talk too much about numbers, the greenfield areas have extremely high student generation rates when we separate them out. Therefore the impact,
So the,
Yes, yes. So if you look at the impact tax rates for Greenfield impact area, which we don't have in the 2024 boundary option, they are extremely high. So no matter how, this is just showing one option of the unit type mix, but no matter how we change the unit type mix, option A, using the 2020 boundary, will always generate a revenue almost 10% or more, between 10 to 20% higher than option B, using the 2024 transportation policy area boundaries.
all right, and that's what I saw on the previous slide too, just in a different way, I guess, that, now, whatever way you slice it, this will have a reduced revenue,
So when we use the transportation policy area boundaries, correct.
the ones that are being proposed.
Correct. Based on what we know right now, the one thing that we do not know, these are 2020, the student generation rates. We are using past student generation rates. So if the student generation rates change a little, it might change a little, but at the same time, if we have a greenfield impact area classification, no matter how much the student generation rates change, I can't see that changing enough for this scenario to change. Yes, the 2020 boundary, as long as it generates greenfield classifications, it will generate a higher revenue.
Right, okay. Yeah, well, obviously, my concern remains that we're death by a thousand cuts here, where every action we're taking is reducing revenue that is going to needed school and transportation infrastructure. And while I get the theoretical analysis of why this might line up, I just don't know if the juice is worth the squeeze, given, as you said, it was going to be a 10% roughly across the board reduction. I'm just trying, could you restate why this is, you think this is a better policy?
Well, the other
Even
thing,
also in light of what I just said.
well, the one thing that we have to remember is we did not have a greenfield impact area classification previously. The one reason I can see why we're seeing greenfield impact areas this time around is because the way the index is set up, I mean, this is going into the index that we haven't talked about yet, but the way the index is set up, each policy area is compared to the countywide average. The countywide average housing growth is lower than before. So some of the areas that got classified as greenfield impact areas, they're not really seeing high housing growth, but because we're using percentages in areas that have smaller unit counts to begin with, a small amount of housing growth compared to the countywide average came out as high. This is an outlier example, but one example is Dickerson. There's less than 1,000 units in there. It saw less than 30 units of a change, but it's showing up as high housing growth. Percentage-wise, it's high. Last 4 years, countywide, there was a lot more housing growth in each policy area. So these areas with smaller housing growth, with less units to begin with, were not showing up as high. It's in a way, I guess, a picture of the county. We're not seeing that much housing growth. So the little areas that saw little housing growth are showing up as high housing growth.
And so that chart that you had, that you were on before, the one that you were just, that one, where you see the greenfield, so the demarcation is in the middle there, right, for A and B, and the greenfield areas, they're class. So explain the difference here.
So this was just going back to 4 years ago when the planning department's initial approach generated a greenfield classification area. There was a bit of hesitation, so we added in a few more factors so that the greenfield classification areas were coming out as turnover impact areas. This time around, we're still using the same index, but the greenfield impact areas are coming out, and the reason that we were overriding the greenfield impact areas in the planning board draft was because there were not enough existing property records to generate a reliable student generation rates on. For the 2020 boundary, since we are seeing a lot more greenfield impact area classifications, that reasoning doesn't hold. So it's hard for us to say if we should overwrite that to Greenfield as well. But just in case, if we want to see what happens if we do overwrite the Greenfield as turnover, so we're combining the turnover records and the Greenfield records together. It will raise the turnover records that much because the Greenfield is included in there, but this is just using that assumption and what it would look like. It's still showing up as higher than when we use the 2024 boundary option.
And last question I have, does OMB or anyone have any comment on this? Have you seen this? I know the general comments you made last time, but
Yeah, I have not, I've not had an opportunity to see this level of detail. I would tend to agree with your point on our hesitancy in terms of taking action that would reduce the revenues that are available in order to support the projects that are currently programmed in the CIP.
all right. Well, I appreciate you doing the analysis. Again, I'm not sure that I think that the juice is worth the squeeze here, but I want to hear what my colleagues have to say. Thank you.
Councilmember Funny Gonzalez.
I think that is our duty to ensure that whatever we do, we're as precise as possible. And I think what we have right now in front of us is a new version that is more realistic on what's happening across the county. Yes, it's revenue, but also I think if it makes more sense, if this is data, this is not people's opinion. I don't have this hesitation of moving forward with this new proposal, but that's just my first reaction out of this.
Yeah, appreciate it. I think staff has made a compelling point here that the maps as proposed are accurate. And we should go based on the accuracy of what the actual student generation rates are in the areas that we're talking about. That's what an impact tax is intended to be, and that's what we ought to be doing. It's not intended to be a way in which we generate the most amount of revenue possible. It's supposed to be a way in which you assess what the generation is, what the impacts are going to be, and you charge a reasonable amount to cover the impact there. I do think there is a question we're going to get to in the next item, personally, on the calculation and how we come up with those calculations. And, I do think there's an opportunity to think through what an appropriate weighting is for the reality versus the aspiration, and what this policy is intended to do and where we find that appropriate balance. But from my perspective, staff has demonstrated that the most accurate way to set the boundaries in a way that is reflective of the reality on the ground and is reflected in the two policy areas that are, that would be most impacted, that were cited, that makes sense to me. I'm sensitive to the points that Councilmember Jawando has made, and we have a choice of whether or not to take that position in each of the policy decisions that we make. We're taking these up one by one, but on this one, I think I lean towards consistency and accuracy, and so I think the staff recommendation in supporting the planning board recommendation is something that I would personally be comfortable with. Do we want to take a vote of colleagues?
Sure.
Say it in your microphone.
Okay. As I stated.
Yeah, I'm sure the public will take my word for it, but you should.
No, but as
Yeah.
I stated before the chair spoke, I want to have this as accurate as possible. That should be number one. So I agree with the staff recommendation and on this, just like the chair mentioned. So.
Councilor Madrondo?
Yeah, we all love accuracy, myself included. I just think the taken in concert with everything else, this is difficult. You also acknowledging that this isn't exactly right, so it's not like this is written on stone tablets, that was probably wrong too when it was written, even if you're writing on stone tablet, doesn't mean it's always right. So there is some, some leeway here. So I just, I'm not comfortable with it. So I think we just list it 2-1 and then move on. But I appreciate the analysis.
And do you want to be listed as supporting the 2020 boundaries, or just the?
Yeah, I think we should leave it. I mean, I've kind of said before, a lot of this is cart before the horse for me. I think, we'll get to the recommendation later, which I think will be unanimous, about putting forward a better way to generate infrastructure dollars, that was the planning board recommendation. And so I think, but yeah, I would like to be listed as support, not doing anything, changing it right at this moment. So in support of the 2020 boundary.
2-1, and Councilmember Jawando supports the 2020 boundaries.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to the next part of this. It's the second half of the same recommendation, and we're on page 4 of the staff report. So the second half of that recommendation, it suggests that the methodology used to assign the school impact area classifications be based on an updated analysis of their latest growth context and potential. And looking more into that, so take just a few minutes here, I'm going to explain what is in the indices for both the 2020 and the 2024 GIPs. In 2020, there were 3 indices that were used to classify school impact areas. There was a housing growth index, an index of housing type, and an enrollment growth index. The 2024 GIP classifies school impact areas based on just 2 indices, the housing growth index and the housing type index. It doesn't use an enrollment index this time due to the lingering effects of the COVID pandemic on enrollment, which is likely to make it a less reliable indice if we do not expect those future enrollment trends to continue, as we would expect them not to given the pandemic. So we're going to focus in on the housing growth index and the housing type index. The 2020 housing growth index is comprised of 3 factors. They are listed on page 4. It's a recent growth, pipeline development, and future capacity. And their weights were assigned to each of these factors at a ratio of 1 to 2 to 2, with recent growth factor weighted half as much as the development pipeline and the residential capacity factor. Residential capacity factor is really your zoning envelope, what you can build based on your zoning. The 2024 housing growth index was comprised of the same similar 3 factors. They are not quite identical in the way that they're measured, but they're very close. And the difference to these 2 really were the weights that were applied to the factors. In 2024, the rates of the 3 different factors for this index were 3 to 2 to 5, which future capacity is weighted the most, with recent growth being only 60% as much as future capacity, and the development pipeline being weighted only 40% as much. When asked the planning staff about it, the rationale for why the weight ratio was adjusted was to give consideration to the intended context or vision of a policy area by giving equal weight to future projects versus projects that had already been approved by the planning board, i.e. those that have been built in the last 5 years and 5 to 6 years, and those that are in the pipeline of approved development. I'm going to move on to the housing type index because they are weighted the same, so I'll explain it and then we'll talk about the weights and then we'll be finished. The 2020 housing type index also comprised of 3 factors, similarly named, recent growth, pipeline, development pipeline, and future capacity, but these are focused on the share of housing in each of these that's related to single family construction. And then the 24 housing type index, again, is very similar. These are both listed at the top of page 5 of the staff report. And those weights given to the housing type index mirror those given to the housing growth index. And the issue here to consider really is whether the school impact classification should be weighted more heavily on what expected growth is in the next 4 to 6 years, or should it be based on, as staff explained, the intended context or vision for a policy area. Council staff's view is that we have made incredible steps in the past 2 growth policies to establish student generation rates that best match expected enrollment, which is influenced by the type and the amount of residential development. And it seems that recently constructed units, those built in the last 5 to 6 years, so that are starting to put or do put students into the schools, and development that's already been approved, so does stand a chance to come to maybe building permit quicker than a brand-new application based on zoning, should be weighted at least as, should be weighted more. What is the reality on the ground versus what we hope to happen is sort of the basis for this. Council staff made a change, just a slight shift to those weights to say, recent growth and the pipeline together are weighted more than what we would expect coming in the future, although it still matters what zoning is and what can come forward. This is a tool we're using for the next 4 years. And it didn't change, basically, ultimately didn't materially change whether something was classified as infill or turnover. So again, the obvious question is like, why are we even having the conversation? Why are you bothering with this? But I do feel it's important for the committee and for the council to understand every component of the recommendations before you. And that second part of that component is that a change had been made here, and the change had been made to focus on something that was more of a vision than less of a reality. Didn't materially change things, but I think you could change the way that recommendation is phrased, and it's really the committee should weigh in on what you think is the appropriate view for how these things move forward.
Well, thanks for fleshing it out and for raising it. I do think that this is a policy that is not intended to be as aspirational and is intended to be reflective of the reality on the ground and what we expect to occur in a fairly imminent period. That's what it's set up to address, and I think our last recommendation was reflective of that. I think we should be consistent. Let me turn it to colleagues and see what thoughts are.
Yes, consistency should be a must, and I appreciate council staff for bringing this up, and I agree with you with your assessment. So,
Councilmember Joanna?
I never turned my mic off. Look, I wasn't saying anything. Yeah, I think your suggestion is to keep it with the former rates. You've pointed out it doesn't make much of a difference at this point. Again, so I'm fine with being consistent with my last vote to keep it the way the former way went. So I'm going to use that term of consistency. But yes, I'm fine if that's what we're doing. That's fine with me.
Okay, so just so I'm understanding, you're
Well, what I would say is I think that the weights that I had used to relook at this were a slight change as well, because some of the other things had
Oh, you changed them as well.
just
Okay.
slightly, and
Not as much.
right,
Okay.
yeah. So I wouldn't want to give the wrong impression.
neither way is fully adopting at 2020. Council staff is trying to be less focused on the aspirational vision of what we hope to happen in particular areas and more reflective of what is happening in those areas over the next 4 to 6 years, which really is the most directly impactful of student generation. It's hard to go more than 6 years out of, student generation of what we, expect for, impact, direct impact of those families and development patterns on schools. But within the next 6 years matters a great deal, and that is the area. So it's really a question of planning's recommendation, the planning board recommendation in the policy that was sent over to us is more of a focus on the aspiration of what could be built, and the staff recommendation weights more heavily the reality of what is happening.
And
What? It's
I'm
just this
sorry.
language, right? It's just
So, and
it's just this one phrase,
End
right?
up changing, right, what you see at the very top of page
Latest
6
growth
of the
income.
staff report, just to clarify that philosophy.
So it would be going from the analysis would be based on, as the current draft says, latest growth, context, and potential, which is what we're talking about.
Based on an updated analysis of their growth and enrollment impact.
Right, striking the potential.
Latest
part.
growth, context.
Latest growth, context, and potential, yes.
But it's language and ratio. The
Exactly.
343
Right,
ratio
and
is
then
really
my
the,
second question,
yeah,
and
that's
then the
really
ratio
change.
is the change from 343.
And it could change things on the margins, which the margins are everything in this policy, because if you get kicked into one or out of one area to another, it has huge impacts on the amount of costs that would incur, and to an extent, the amount of revenue. It changes the calculations for all in terms of what's included and what's not included. So there are impacts here. It just so happens in this current dynamic, it wouldn't have a direct impact, but it could have an impact as things are calculated and recalculated moving forward. And so this does matter. I don't want to downplay the issue.
I do have a question though, just, so could you just state what the current ratio is, what the planning board has to propose and what you've proposed?
Right, and there are a lot more nuances to this. I didn't want to get into the weeds. Jason's laughing because he knows that the individual factors themselves, the way the data was displayed, is different. So before
So
the weights,
it's all. the
right,
weight
they're kind of all tied up.
are
The
to-
weights prior were 1 to 2 to 2, and
But
this
future capacity is obviously was emphasized quite a bit, quite a
it was
bit. It was
well,
weighted higher.
currently it's 1 for recent growth, 2 for the pipeline, and 2 for development potential in the future. Planning boards was 3 for recently built, 2 for the pipeline, and 5 for what could happen. And then council staff just suggested, again, keeping similar to what they've brought forward, 3 for what's been recently built, but then just shifting, making it 4 for the pipeline, spreading out some of that between what was future and pipeline, making it 4 for the pipeline and 3 for your future zoning capacity. It just
So you
spreads it
add
a little
one.
more.
Yeah, I got it, okay, yes. Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, so it'll be 3-0 on that recommendation. I appreciate it. Again, it doesn't have a direct impact today, but it could have, an impact down the road. And I think the justification for how we come up with it matters as much as anything. And I will note, and was noted in the packet, but now Director Sartori, but previously in his former role, has done a tremendous amount of work to get the student generation rates to be more accurate. We still have work to do. We will always have work to do to make sure that they're reflective of what the realities are for families and for students and for teachers. But we have made progress in recent years, and I appreciate the work. I think there's been more collaboration and coordination between planning and the school system recently than there had been. There was almost no coordination and collaboration several years ago on these calculations. There's been quite a bit more. We'd like to see even more of that moving forward, and I know all of us are committed to that, so I just wanted to note that. So this will be 3-0 on this recommendation. Appreciate the conversation on it. Let's move on to the next item.
Thank you. Moving on to the transportation element recommendations. Start with the transportation policy areas. This is recommendation 3.1A, although what we'll be discussing now is not necessarily the text of the recommendation, but rather the underlying categorizations. During the committee's prior work session on this, the discussion led towards what the definitions of these different colored areas are between red, orange, yellow, and green. The definitions as proposed by the planning board are included in the packet. There was some concern with the, you can go to the map slide. We can show the map of the proposed policy areas. These are the current policy, or these are the current policy areas that were adopted in 2020. And the definitions therein. And if you go to the next slide, I believe. Yes, these are the shaded areas are what's proposed by the planning board. There's a lot there, so we can walk through it. But the crux of this is the committee requested that council staff work with planning staff to come up with clear, concise, mutually exclusive definitions for the different types of policy areas that will then, lead to how the policy areas are designated. There was concern, for instance, that the planning board's proposed definitions had town centers listed in 2 different places, and so necessarily wasn't always clear where certain areas would be designated. So council staff and planning staff worked together to develop 2 options for these definitions. Those options are listed at the table on page 6 of the packet. Really, the only difference between these two definitions is whether downtowns that are outside of Metro or Purple Line station policy areas are listed in as orange or red. You'll see in option 1, downtowns are omitted. The term downtowns are omitted altogether. This is because if you go with option 1, downtowns that are not in Metro Station or Purple Line Station areas, because they're not included in the red line definition, would be orange as long as they're in corridor focused growth areas. Whereas option 2 includes downtowns in the red policy areas, regardless of whether they're in a Purple Line or Metro Station policy area. The resulting map changes of these two options, both options would not change any of the planning board recommended green, yellow, or orange policy areas, but would option 1 would categorize the Great Seneca Life Sciences Center, the White Oak Downtown, and Rock Spring as orange policy areas, whereas option 2 would categorize those 3 as red policy areas, as was recommended by the planning board. The planning staff and the planning board prefer option 2, as it effectively maintains the recommendations that they sent over, though providing some clearer language. Council staff recommends option 1, as it more closely reflects existing transportation alternatives available in each policy area, existing or imminent in the case of the Purple Line over the course of this GIP. And so I'll stop there to allow discussion on the definitions.
Appreciate it. Well, first of all, thank you. These two options are way clearer, with all due respect, than what was presented. So I think either way, it's a cleaner, more concise, much easier to understand and articulate policy. So I think that's number one objective that we had last time, was making sure that everybody understood what we were talking about. And I think we have two options before us. And so I really do appreciate that. And then the one item that we really did discard is treating the 3 areas the same. Council staff had a different approach to that. The committee did not want to entertain that, and either option would reflect that regardless of where we go. So I think we're moving in the right direction. Let me open it up to colleagues for any questions or follow-up or comments on this for either council staff or planning.
Do you want us to vote on which option we want?
If you're ready to vote. If you have questions, ask your questions. Either way.
I personally, we talked about this previously. I said it that I believe that places like White Oak Downtown, Great Seneca Life Sciences, Rock Spring, with all the investment that they have done on transportation, deserve to have to be in the red policy area, which means option 2. So I'm gonna say one more time. I think it should be option 2. For me, it's not just the purple line and the red line. For me, it's also BRT. When I'm thinking of White Oak, for example. So I want to see more investment going to that side of the county. So I'm going to stick with what I said before. Option 2 makes the most sense to me. I yield back.
Appreciate that. Councilmember Jordan.
Thank you for doing this analysis. I want to echo that. Did you do any accompanying fiscal analysis around this change?
For the record, David Ansbacher, no, we didn't, but red policy areas have transportation impact tax rates that are about 60% less than orange.
So we can assume something there. Yes, go ahead if you'd like to say something.
Oh, just to keep in mind that.
Introduce yourself.
Oh, sorry, Darcy Buckley, for the record. So White Oak, most of White Oak is covered by the Opportunity Zone, so they don't pay impact tax either way currently.
I remember that, yeah. Most of it, but not all.
That is, to continue that designation is a recommendation in front of the GO committee as part of the impact tax bill. So the fiscal impact as provided to the council recommendation 3.1A in general was an annual decrease in $2.2 million in transportation impact taxes, with a note that most of that would come in from the designation of the red policy areas. So these three becoming red rather than orange. I will note that, first of all, these are obviously difficult to predict as they they depend on what development comes through and at what scale, and that the, GO committee, through the impact tax bill will, designate impact tax rates. So, this fiscal impact assumes the maintenance of the, recommended impact tax rates, but that's sort of it's a sort of a two-factor equation with the policy area designations and the rates.
Back to my death by 1,000 cuts analogy. So I wanted to say this last time, and I want to say it this time. The transportation improvements that these funds would go to support are all going to be things that we would all want, like sidewalks and like to make places safer. We had a big discussion when we were doing the White Oak Science Gateway Master Plan about the undergrounding of utilities in a stretch of that most kind of utilized part of White Oak. And so I think we want walkable, bikeable communities, but this is going to could have the impact of reducing funds that go for those things. It's shifting who's going to pay for it, and that's kind of this whole discussion that we're having is like who should pay for the things we say we want. And I think the answer should be it should be fairly distributed, and obviously we want to balance that against actually getting development happening, which is happening in White Oak. We've got that town center, and we've got a lot of stuff happening, but it's not the same as downtown Bethesda or downtown Silver Spring. It just isn't. And that combined with the fact that this would reduce funds going for the things that we want to see when there is development happening. I just don't understand where the transportation is not there, the infrastructure is not there. We have the BRT going down, but it's not as robust as it needs to be. So I don't know why we would reduce it, given that also there's a recommendation to maintain some of the things. We're trying to balance all this, like the White Oak, what you just stated, the opportunity zones. Thank you, Lisa Gavoni. Opportunity zones. So yeah, I think I would lean to council staff's recommendation, based on that. But Mr. Osbacher, I will never cut off anyone who wants to say something.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, there's a couple things at play here. One of the reason perhaps that we don't have BRT and aren't really advancing BRT, at least in the capital budget yet, to places like Rock Spring is that we don't have transit supportive densities. Transit supportive densities are critical to getting people in transit, and going with a red policy area, which again has 60% lower impact tax rates, at least for transportation, is a way to help spur economic development and get people in transit. I'd also say that another component of this is the transportation demand management regulations that are under review currently. I believe they're still under review. Red policy areas require greater transportation demand management practices, which is ongoing and which will encourage people to get out of their cars, walk, bike, take transit, and carpool. So that's some of the thinking behind this. And then finally, private development does, as we know, provide infrastructure. So it's not like we won't get any of the infrastructure if this becomes a red policy.
Yeah, but we will potentially get less funding for infrastructure.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I think I've stated where I am. I'd lean towards one.
Yeah, appreciate that. Appreciate the comments from council staff and from planning as well. I'll just note there is a foundational question here. There is a fundamental question, and it was noted, when development happens. I think what you're hearing from planning is there's also a big question of if development happens and what type of development we get and whether or not we can pursue our goals. And in terms of burdens, there is a question, and historically, it has been the prevailing view that new development should pay the disproportionate share of costs. And that has been a shift, and there have been a lot of policy changes to reflect that shift over the last 6 years, that it should be more of a shared burden, that the benefits of new development, the benefits of a more transit-oriented environment, the sidewalks and some of the things that were noted by my colleague are things that don't just benefit new residents and don't just benefit new businesses, they benefit everybody in the community. And so there should be a shared burden for a shared benefit, and we should find a more appropriate balance in order to move forward with the policy priorities that we get. Having said that, this is a tricky one, I will say. We pushed last time, and we added Purple Line stations to red policy areas, which had historically been metro policy areas. And that was a push. And now we're pushing again. And it's a lot of pushing. And while I agree generally of the type of growth that we want in these areas and that we need to be deliberate and intentional and we need to commit to the changes that we want, I understand the concern that we might be pushing a push that we've already pushed on in the last policy update 4 years ago. I also think that the biggest change, and the reason why I was most supportive of the red policy change, was specifically the auto test. That is what moved me in the last policy changes that we made. It had nothing to do with impact taxes, and it had everything to do with whether or not it would be reasonable or appropriate for us to require a test that resulted in an added lane for cars or an added turn lane for cars in a place that we were desperately trying to reimagine as a safer place to walk, to incentivize and to encourage the use of transit and to encourage people to walk and to be in a livable, bikeable community. That remains my interest here, and I think that is where the compelling argument is for these three communities. And so, I just will float to colleagues if there's a way for us to come together. Council staff has suggested a way to do that in the packet, which is the next part of this same item, and I think we can talk about it together if there was interest, because I do think it may impact us. If we did go with option one, but also paired that with the staff recommendation for downtown areas to not require an auto test, to me, that would be the most compelling option, and I think the best approach to address what planning is hoping to do here without some of the impacts and concerns that have been raised. So I just wanted to float that out and say, I think, perhaps if there was interest, we could take these up together. Councilmember Joando.
Thank you. Well, given that, and I appreciate you raising that up, I know we were going to get there. Can DOT come up and give their view on this and on this conversation? Obviously, we might have something to say on transportation infrastructure and motor vehicle tests.
Thank you, Councilmember Joando. Haley Peckett for the record. Thank you. I actually really appreciate planning and council staff and all the work that we've done on these recommendations. And I actually really like, especially the option one, it keeps our impact tax levels at the orange level to support building out kind of what you said. This is the infrastructure we all want to see. I also want to emphasize that our future vision for transit-oriented development does encourage density, but I also want to note that that density can be achieved by a lot of ways other than the growth and infrastructure policy, which is meant to focus on providing the adequate public facilities. So the more that we can try to focus our recommendations on that, the better. I think that in terms of the motor vehicle recommendations specifically, so DOT would support option one. In terms of the motor vehicles, again, there's, I think, a lot that could be good there, but I think the one thing that we would note is the downtowns have changed in terms of their definition. So downtowns have been defined in Thrive. They've been defined as part of the complete street design guidelines. And I understand in the fall 2023 pedestrian master plan, council had the authority to designate new downtown areas. So there's nothing that says that a downtown area has to be accompanied by a certain level of transit or other non-motorized infrastructure. So we just want to recognize that anytime we're adding something that puts the definition of downtown into the GIP, council has a lot of discretion about what does or doesn't become downtown. If you're making Damascus a downtown 4 years from now, this would apply to that too. I understand that's probably an extreme example, but noting that we might want to have a definition of downtown that's more consistent and tied to transit. I think that the other thing is we would recognize that in reality, the developments, we want to see the traffic studies because it's important for us to know what the impacts are going to be. If we were to go with option 1 and keep these as orange, but we want to encourage that development to happen while the BRT and other transit infrastructure is being built out, for the time being, people who are moving in might be reliant on private automobiles. And if that's the case, if there's going to be an impact, we want to understand what that impact would be without necessarily requiring the developers to build out and widen roadways, which in reality, Rebecca Torm will attest doesn't ever happen, or is extremely rare that we require that widening. Instead, we want to put out the idea that perhaps if there is a large impact from vehicular traffic, that developers could pay some sort of in lieu fee that goes towards a transit CIP. We're looking to build out the Great Seneca Transportation Network. There's 2 more lines to build. We're looking to build out the US 29 BRT Phase 2. So if we could get funding for that comes from some of those vehicular impacts, I think that would be a benefit.
Appreciate that. The vehicular to impacts under option 1, that would still, what is the difference? That doesn't get removed. That's still in orange, correct?
So currently, yes. However, the recommendation 3.19, the additional.
Right, the one you were saying was not have that.
Stuff. I believe that is what MCDOT is responding to when it comes to motor vehicle adequacy.
Right, okay. So, yeah, that's helpful. I think and thank you also for working. I know we asked all of you to go back and work, and you did that, so thank you for working with the team. The White Oak, Rock Spring, and areas, those 3 areas are not where we want them to be with transit infrastructure for sure. And again, it is a shared burden. I think last time, as Council President said, we pushed a lot in creating the tiered system, and we moved things, along, and that was the whole idea. We did get development, and obviously we had the pandemic, which kind of throws a wrench into some things, but yeah, so I think it makes sense to either way, I really want to make sure we're studying in a better way. I think I brought this up last time, what the impact of previous changes has been in the best way we can. Like you don't know what you don't know. You can't say if something hasn't been built, but we can say versus the previous 4 years before to this 4 years, what happened after the change, right? And we can get some of that analysis. But I think based on all these comments, I'm still at number 1. So I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, so option 1 and not,
yeah, I mean, based
not
on DOT's
supportive
comments on the tests. Because these areas do have, as you know, like White Oak still, like people are still car dependent in these areas and will be for the foreseeable future. Unless we find hundreds of millions of dollars to build out the rest of the, BRT and everything has to come online. So I just don't know why we wouldn't want to, make sure we're capturing that information. And I don't know how much of a deterrent that would be to future development. I don't think it is. There is development happening.
well, the only purpose of a test is to fund infrastructure that the test
Right, she
supports. So if
suggested
the
other
test,
types
so,
of infrastructure.
but that's not what's on the table. I appreciate the hypothetical thought of we could do certain things in certain other places and certain circumstances to get us to certain places, but we have a growth and infrastructure policy with an LATR requirement, and the question is, what's a red policy area, what's an orange policy area, and when are vehicle adequacy tests required, under what circumstances, and when. So I think there could be some agreement down the road of certain things. I don't think there's a ton of disagreement there, but that's not really what's before us, what's before us right now. So I think we can only vote on the things that are before us. Could I just ask a question on the LATR test? As part of the last update, we increased the standards for bike and pedestrian tests in the red policy areas as we eliminated the car tests. Is the recommendation here to have those alternative tests be part of this? So that these projects in downtowns would be held to the same adequacy tests as red policy areas?
So what we have currently, the recommendation currently, is that these downtowns, the 3 downtowns that are not, that under option 1 would not be red policy areas, would be held to an orange policy area level of pedestrian bike, which, I mean, and it's all the same radius, it's all this, yes, yeah, right, okay, yeah, I thought so, yeah. The non-motor vehicle adequacy is not affected by this designation. That is new in this recommend. That is a recommendation that was recommended for approval by this committee, to have the areas
Orange and red be
of-
the same, be held to the same standard.
as well as yellow and green in terms of the scope, and how these tests are conducted. The only change is the motor vehicle adequacy, which does not exist in the red policy area, in red policy areas, but does exist in orange, yellow, and green.
Okay, well, I would have been supportive of, you can put me down as option 1 without the LATR test, it's a 111. And then I'll, okay,
I will go for that too.
okay, all right, well, there we go,
Look at you.
there we go.
So option 1 with recommendation 3.19 as included in the staff packet.
Correct.
Can I just clarify one thing? So what that means is they would be orange, those 3 areas, but there wouldn't be no motor vehicle test required.
Correct.
And in those downtowns, which there currently is, in areas in those 3 areas.
Correct. In all orange policy areas, which all 3 are currently.
Okay. And could you just elaborate so people understand the nature of the change, and if anyone can jump in? What is done, it was alluded to by the council president, what's done with these tests? And what they test?
Sure. For the record, Jason Sartori, Planning Director, and I'll let the rest of our team elaborate a little bit more on this. But, when you conduct those tests, we then figure out, well, how do you mitigate the results of those tests? And so if we do a motor vehicle test and it identifies gaps from a motor vehicle perspective, then we will identify improvements that could be made to mitigate that. And we then, balance that based on proportionality. We don't want to overburden any one developer, beyond their impact. But, we'll try to get the pedestrian and bicycle improvements. But if a motor vehicle test is done and there are motor vehicle improvements identified, there's the possibility that a motor vehicle improvement could be made that may actually conflict with the downtown vision that we have for that area. And so if we don't do the test, the motor vehicle test, then we assure ourselves that we're going to be only focused in these areas that we envision as downtowns, that the council's decided as downtowns, that we're only going to be making pedestrian, bicycle, and transit improvements as a result of LATR.
DOT, do you have any comment on any of that? Okay. Just introduce yourself. Right, there you go. You're on.
You're good.
Red is on, like the red policy areas.
Thank you. Rebecca Torma, MCDOT. What we see, basically the LATR studies, what they do is they go out and they look at the intersections. What we look for in the intersection is to make sure that there's capacity in these areas. Red policy areas, you're not seeing, you're not doing the studies, so therefore you don't know what's happening at the intersections. So when a resident calls up about a building in Bethesda or Great Seneca, if they're in the red policy area, and they say, hey, what's happening to my intersection? We don't know exactly what's happening at that intersection because we haven't done the studies. And then the reality.
Studies of congestion, for example, right?
Yes. So, but what that doesn't, what that still allows you, even without even in a red policy area, is if we need a turn lane. So say we need a left turn lane to go into a site. That's generally what we do, we've put in when we do them. The majority of projects, I've been with the county for a few years, and when we changed the LATR before, and they suggested putting in more areas in red policy and not doing studies, it was fine. Most of the developments don't do intersection mitigation. What we were seeing before the pandemic was really traffic signal timing, but it wasn't, we're not adding double right turn lanes or double left turn lanes unless, neighborhoods that come in, we want to make sure that they can get out of their site. So we add a left turn lane in maybe, but the traffic,
So it's not inhibiting development as far as cost to the developer, as far as building, lengthening a roadway. It's just giving you information about whether you need a left-hand traffic signal.
right, and that's primarily what we see. We don't really see any vehicular modification or roadway improvements. What we're getting really is the pedestrian. I mean, the development that's coming in doesn't need to mitigate.
So then why, okay, right, so then why are we doing the test? What's the value of the test then?
The value of the test is to understand what's happening at the intersections.
So that we could, if there is a problem, we could theoretically do something about it. Give me an example, other than the left-hand turn lane.
Yeah, it's signal timing adjustments, if we need to add a left turn lane. If a resident asks what's happening at the intersection, why is it congested?
And how much do these tests cost? I heard you mouth a lot.
I have no idea.
A lot, but does anyone know? Average? Guess? Example that you know of? If not, it's okay.
I could literally not tell you how much it costs.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know that we want to put a number out there.
Yeah, that's fine, okay, but they can be costly, they happen, and what you're saying is that there's very little done with them. I'm paraphrasing what you said to me just now.
Yeah. So I wouldn't say that. We look at them, we review them, there's no mitigation being done with them.
There's no mitigation.
Yes.
Right, so there could be a problem, but we're not requiring developers to mitigate it in any way. So then again, I go back to what is the value?
If there's a problem at the intersection currently, and it shows it in a red policy, in an orange policy area that has to study the intersections, they are required to mitigate that. So they are required to mitigate.
And what form is that mitigation taking then? Ms. Peck?
So I was just going to jump in and say, we used the example before about the schools, like you hit a trigger and then all of a sudden you need to build a new classroom. There could be something similar for the motor vehicle. What Rebecca's saying is we don't actually trigger that. What ends up happening is we have the data. So we know when an intersection is at, we call it levels of service, when it's at a lower level of service, then we understand when this happens, we might need to change the signal timing, or we might need to put in a new CIP project. We could require the developer to put in that turn lane to improve the level of service of the intersection, which does sometimes happen. Having the data is helpful because then we know it for all the downstream impacts. I'll rest there if you have follow-up.
So I'll just say in 3.5 years, and we provided the data in the appendix to the report, there was one traffic improvement that was made. I will say the value is in the other tests that you are asking about, in ADA test, the streetlight illuminance test, the bus shelter test, the pedestrian comfort test, and I'm missing one.
Bicycle, yes.
Maybe I got them all. The bicycle test.
Yours, literally the one you came up with.
And the bicycle test. So that's where the analysis is we find is most beneficial and where we are seeing the improvements.
Got it. Can I ask a question? Yeah, I'll just wrap up then. Yes, absolutely. Chair, thank you for being here. So, yeah, and I'm trying to see if I can talk myself into agreeing with my colleagues here, but which I'm sure they would love. Obviously, more data is always helpful. The tension I feel too is that these areas, and I'll just use White Oak as an example because I'm there a lot and I live over there. Cars are not going away in White Oak. Okay, so let's just not pretend that right now. That's not how it's happening. That's not how people are traversing. Do we want more people to get on transit and get on the beach? Absolutely, and we should be investing in that. But so to the extent that I don't think we want to close our eyes and say I don't want to know what's happening there, So, but I'm not hearing a super compelling argument from DOT about what we're going to do, what these downstream impacts are, because if this goes away and the developers don't do it, who's going to? We wouldn't do them, right? They wouldn't happen, correct?
I wanted to bring up one point because you mentioned the downstream. So I think both for For Maryland 28, and I think you also see this on Maryland 97, you do have
Beck Road, Georgia Avenue.
Thank you. You have upstream and downstream impacts, and so there could be a bottleneck. Now, we've accepted.
There are bottlenecks.
We've accepted that, right, already to some degree. And I think what Rebecca's saying is that we aren't going to require a developer to go and add an extra lane of traffic from that. But we want to know that those exist because we are the ones who come and talk to these residents who come and say, when I moved in here, I could actually get in and out of my condo. Now I can't anymore. So having something that says, this is what happened and we approved it, at least we know that it's there and we recognize this is happening. Again, this is something that this is up to you as a council to determine your tolerance for these upstream and downstream impacts, but we would expect that they would occur.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
You don't need an LATR to determine existing congestion levels on major arterials. And the suggestion that we would need that, frankly, is disingenuous. What we're talking about here are prospective impacts of prospective development. I think we have conflated these issues in a very unhelpful way, to be honest. So the question here is, will a new development create a number of additional trips, and will those additional trips create congestion, and will that additional congestion with cars require for additional mitigation to help cars traverse faster through areas that we are trying to get people to be safer in? That's what we're talking about. So when we say the only thing that was raised by Department of Transportation were left turn lanes, that was the one specific mitigation that was shared. I haven't heard another mitigation while I was sitting here. A left turn lane is something that we are intentionally trying to avoid to the extent possible in downtown areas, in urban areas. So we're literally testing for things that will trigger mitigations that go in the opposite direction, which is what we heard from planning. I have moved here away from planning's recommendation towards something that addresses part of what they were trying to do, but without having the concern and the impact of changing the policy area, which I think is a bit far, to argue that a metro area and a downtown area are the same thing. They are not, they're different. And I think Councilmember Jawando noted that in what he was describing it and how he was describing it. But we're not talking about what people are feeling on the ground today. You don't need an LATR to do that. It doesn't take a traffic engineer to sit in a car and feel congestion. It takes a traffic counter that DOT can do any day of the week, that Maryland State Department of Transportation does literally every single day. We have analyses on this of what is currently on the road. The question is the prospective, and then what mitigations are we going to require, and whether those mitigations move us closer towards a public policy outcome that we want or farther away or no difference. And what we're hearing is twofold. One, we require these tests and we do basically nothing with them, but frankly, it's nice to have some information. When people call us, at least we have a study we can point to, which is not particularly compelling from my perspective. And number two, we have, in the event that things go to a certain point, which they almost never do, but when they do, we can require an extra turn lane. To me, that is not compelling enough to require it. I think the other tests are very important to move us towards what we want in downtown. Where I will agree with you and with Department of Transportation, I think we need to be very intentional and specific on how we treat downtown areas and all areas that we designate as a council. Now, I think the suggestion by the executive branch was it was a problem that the council has this authority to be able to designate these areas. I don't see that as a problem for the policy makers to make policy, but I do agree that it needs to be consistent and that we need to really understand what the full ramifications are when we designate those areas, and that is true across all of our policies because downtown areas are designated in multiple places. So I stand by what we have recommended. I think it's very important that as we move forward, we be very intentional. I take that and heed that to light. I actually made a note of it in my packet before you even said it because I absolutely wholeheartedly agree with you on that about how we need to be consistent, we need to be intentional. But I think this conversation was illuminating. Let me turn it over if she would like, to Council Vice President and welcome her and appreciate her joining us.
Thank you. This is dangerous. I have watched all the other sessions before this. I do want to note, though, in September 23rd, when we were talking about the daycares, someone from planning, and excuse me, I did not write down the person's name, said that these studies cost about $50,000 to $100,000. So I just wanted to put that out there as.
Some childcare, which are small.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I just wanted to say that's the range we're
Yeah,
talking about.
my understanding, and I did remember that. The reason why I didn't mention it was in the context of childcares, and that could be smaller than some of the larger projects because most likely, and this was noted as well, that the LATRs tend to be proportionate with the size of the project because it reflects the proportionality and the extent of what needs to be
So that would be on the
studied.
smaller side of the scale. So, okay. Just wanted to check that.
Okay. Let me turn, I can turn it to the Department of Transportation.
Comment, thank you. So thank you for all of that, appreciate it. I think that I just want to clarify that one of the reasons that we can't do any like large mitigations is from proportionality. I mean, it just doesn't make sense to have a developer that has a large impact, could be in a greenfield area that, you know, you just can't require them to do that same level. But I do think that we all are in agreement. We mentioned this before. It's not what's sitting on the table, but I want to just plant that seed of consideration that if we are seeing a development that's going to come in and have a large vehicular impact, can we use that for good? Can we look at an in lieu fee that puts money towards these BRT and other transit enhancement projects that we know we are desperately seeking funding for, and we know that that would really help us move the needle.
Appreciate it. It's not before the committee or even before this committee or the council, but appreciate you noting that
So,
again.
just in light
Let
of
me
that,
turn it to Councilman
I will
Toronto.
agree with your compromise to get rid of the test for now. And I'm happy to work with you on that proposal.
I'll just note, I did work with the county executive and the Department of Transportation for over a year, as did Councilmember Glass as chair of the Transportation and Environment Committee, and we could already have that before us if the county executive was willing to go along with what the consensus was. So there is agreement there, but sometimes when you snatch conflict from the jaws of consensus, it becomes very difficult to bring people together. But happy for everybody to be part of that effort, and would just be hopeful that when agreements are made, that we're able to have consensus and not necessarily find conflict amid the consensus. With that, we have a 3-0 recommendation for option 1 with the 319 exempt all downtowns from motor vehicle adequacy tests tied to it. And they need to be one recommendation together, and that's a 3-0.
And that's all under a unanimous recommendation for the 3.1A text as written, just as the shell for.
Yes.
Yeah, all right. Right, just to make sure we're running through these. All right, thank you. Next, moving on to motor vehicle adequacy. This is recommendation 3.3 to update the LATR intersection delay standards to reflect changes to policy area boundaries and designations. This is a recommendation relevant to 8 new orange policy areas that were formerly yellow. None of these are the areas that we were talking about in the previous recommendation. Council staff recommended deferring decision on this because we had not yet wrapped up 3.1 in case the committee had chosen to designate any other orange areas as, or any currently yellow areas as orange beyond these. But given the map that was just approved, council staff recommends approving this recommendation.
Without objection.
Thank you. Moving on to the LATR exemptions. This was the main item that was deferred and requested for some more data and different language from the September 23rd committee work session. The request, not all had recommendations or requests for data and language attached to them, but the committee opted to vote on all sort of as one bunch, as one tranche. The committee also suggested or requested that they be presented as sort of in their types of exemptions. So council staff will walk through them in that order. So first, new and complete exemptions. There are two recommendations to create two new exemptions that would exempt entire projects from LATR, which you'll see how that differs from some of the other recommendations momentarily. The first of these relates to mixed income housing communities, a new type of land use created by ZTA in 2023 to expedite the review process for development with affordable and deeply affordable housing with commercial opportunities in communities that may lack commercial spaces. So recommendation 3.11b would exempt these types of development from LATR. Council staff notes that the affordable units within these developments would be exempt from LATR improvement calculations if the committee were to recommend recommendation 3.11a, so they sort of go hand in hand. But this recommendation would go further, exempting all units in mixed income housing communities, including any market rate and commercial units. Council staff during the previous work session raised concerns around the adequacy of public facilities that may be lost as a result of exempting LATR improvements for these type of developments. So council staff suggests the committee does not approve recommendation 3.11b. And I guess I'll ask whether we want to go.
Yeah, let's take this one up separate, because I do think they are different. They're similar, but they're different. So let me just ask a question. The most compelling thing that came up in the last work session was the timing question. Councilmember Sales and I put forward a zoning text amendment. The purpose of the zoning text amendment was to dramatically expedite the process and the timing that it takes to approve affordable housing projects because of the desperate need for affordable housing projects. That was not included in the justification originally. I think it's the most important. It's the thing that I'm most concerned about because council staff notes the financial impact is pretty de minimis, to be honest with you. And the truth is, it's coming out of our left pocket or our right pocket. The county is funding these projects with massive levels of public subsidy. There's no such thing as mixed income affordable housing projects that don't have huge amounts of public subsidy. So whether we incur the cost through this process and then repay it through another process to make it work as part of the capital stack, or we find another way to do it, that's a legitimate question and argument of is this the right vehicle or not. I think we could have that discussion. I think it's somewhat a distinction without much of a difference, but it is a conversation worth having. But the timing was the whole point of that zoning text amendment. And if the argument is true that with an LATR requirement, the deadlines and timelines that make that zoning text amendment actually happen and work would not be able to be fulfilled reasonably on a consistent basis, that is something that I think is relevant to this conversation. So I'd like to have a conversation about that.
Yes, the timeline is a major issue, and that's how this idea was first floated to us. What's happening instead is that projects are coming in well ahead of time before putting in their application, and so there's a lot more work being done outside of that, out of that review time, in order to really complete what staff would like is to complete the entire LATR process before the deadline even starts, because it's not enough time to do the whole process within, and to come to agreements.
Can you back that up? Like, how long does an LATR take? What's the timeline? What's being missed?
Just to fully clarify there, I mean, basically this wouldn't impact when that clock starts ticking. That 60-day review, 65-day review would still be a 65-day review, but it impacts when it starts, not, that 60 days would still be the same. So we can't accept it until they've completed their study. And so if not having to do a study, if they don't have to do a study, then they can start the clock. We can submit their application, we can start the clock earlier. How long does it take to do? Do we have anyone who has a sense?
It depends.
We don't know how long it takes. I mean, it probably varies from study to study quite a bit. I would say that coming to an agreement on the mitigation that developers are to provide, that can take a long time, and that often occurs after the study is submitted. So the idea that we can come to agreement in 60 days with the LATR mitigation, that's to me a stretch.
Eli Glacier for the record, Montgomery Planning. Building on that, the LATR process is sort of iterative. Regulatory staff work with the applicant to set up the scope of what the study is, what the tests are, the study areas, the number of intersections, if there's a motor vehicle adequacy test. They agree on that. The applicant does the analysis, all of the different tests for LATR, and then based on the size of the project, we know what their proportionality guide cap is, so like what the limit of how much they can pay to mitigate the deficiencies they find, and then they create a list of projects and recommend which ones they want to build to go against their proportionality cap, and then they work with regulatory staff and with MCDOT and other agencies to finalize that list. So that process is iterative. There's multiple steps. The feedback loops of the number of days that DOT has to respond to some of these things are, it's like 30 days at a time. So these things add up, and then on top of that, you're all well aware of sort of the challenges that we have had in coordinating with Maryland SHA on a lot of these things. So their regulatory timeline, such as it is, does not match up with this. So we do see a real tension in just getting these projects in, because on paper, if one of these came in today and this exemption wasn't in place, we would meet the deadline, but only because there were several months of pre-work in advance of having them submit it, when they could have just submitted it at the beginning before all of that if this exemption was in place. So it's just, we want the LATR, we want the development, and we want it to be quick. And you can't. There's not enough time to do all that.
Okay, so the point here is it doesn't necessarily slow the timeline once the clock starts, but it delays the clock from starting, which defeats the purpose of the zoning text amendment. That's the point that planning is raising. I will say I think that's a much more compelling argument than the one you brought forward originally, but let me yield to colleagues and see what others think.
I was wondering if council staff has any new thoughts after this explanation.
We are, there is this 60 to 65 day clock that is codified in the ZTA. But beyond that, in terms of, how long these negotiations, to determine improvements take, how long the study takes, that's something that varies highly, between projects and can be impacted, based on, level of effort that staff and the developer themselves are able to put into it. The LATR study is happening, at the same time as the developer is filling out the application. So it's not like there's a period of time where the developer is committing solely to the LATR study and is not able to complete any of the other elements of their review. So this is a tricky one because it's not clear exactly how long or short this time period is during which this LATR study is happening. Council staff's focus is largely around preserving a universal standard of adequacy as is codified in the Adequate Public Facilities Ordinance, and allowing considerations of timeline and expediency to be sorted sort of around that.
Thank you so much for that. I will say, as you mentioned, this is a tricky one, and as a new ZTA, I feel like I'm gonna go with council staff on this one, and then continue to monitor how the ZTA makes progress, and see if we need to make changes in the next growth policy in the next 4 years. But right now, I find it difficult. So,
Councilor Madrona.
I'll agree. I'll also note that I think it was mentioned that there's only one application under review. So I don't think this is something that is slowing down development. Everyone has said we want these studies to be done, and so I would agree that we would leave it the way it is.
Well, the number of applications actually may speak to the opposite conclusion. I think the argument would be made more clearly in that way. I get where people are coming from on this, where colleagues are coming from on this, where the department and council staff are coming. I do have mixed views on this. I do think there are universal adequacy. I do think that we have a public policy that we enthusiastically supported, and we need to make sure that we're not doing anything that's inconsistent with that policy. I also stand by the fact that we would never expect these projects on their own through the private sector to pay for these improvements. Like, the public sector is going to have to pay for them. The public sector is already paying for a large chunk of the building because these projects don't happen without significant amounts of public support, federal, state, and county. So I still stand by the fact that I think that the county should do the test and the county should pay for the improvements, and we should spur as much affordable housing as we possibly can. That in and of itself is a massive public benefit, and if we could get more affordable housing, it would be a huge plus for the community, and the impacts of the housing are public responsibilities when it comes to affordable housing in particular, and we should take that responsibility seriously. And I think the idea that we're treating everybody the same when we have massive needs, and on the one hand say we desperately need and want something, and then on the other hand say but we're not willing to pay for it and not willing to do it on the public side, I think that's a bit of a disconnect. So I'm going to disagree 2-1. I'll go with the planning recommendation on this, but respectfully I do agree, understand and agree that this is a tough one, and know that we didn't arrive here lightly, but we can list that one as a 2-1. Let's move on to the next one.
Thank you. So the other new and complete LATR exemption recommended by the Planning Board is recommendation 3.13, which would, quote, exempt daycares from the requirement to complete an LATR study. During the September 23rd work session, committee members engaged in a substantial discussion around this one and expressed a desire to exempt smaller daycares that operate on thin margins, where an LATR study could make or break a project, and while maintaining LATR requirements for larger daycare facilities. And the committee requested that council staff work with planning staff to look at daycare applications that the county has received and sort of find what where the threshold between those two types of projects are. Planning staff provided council staff with transportation impact data for the 30 new daycare applications that the county received since the new LATR process began in 2016. The full list of these projects and all of the information of them are contained in the packet, but of importance to the committee's question, 19 of those 30 were projected to generate less than 30 net new vehicle trips. Most of these were small expansions to existing daycares, and a few of them were new daycares for under 20 children, these very, very small daycares. Another 3 of those applications were projected to generate between 30 and 50 net new trips, and were for slightly larger daycares that under the committee's 30 vehicle trip threshold, as was recommended for approval on September 16th, would be required to complete an LATR study. The remaining 8 applications were for 70 or more net new trips, and these daycares were for 170 or in some cases way more children. So these are these larger daycares that were referenced last time. Based on this data, council staff has developed an amendment to recommendation 3.13, which would now read, would read, require LATR studies only for proposed daycare development projects that generate 50 or more peak hour vehicle trips. So raising that threshold from 30 to 50 for just daycares to capture all of these small to medium sized daycares not requiring them to complete LATR studies at all, and ones above 50 would be required to complete the studies and make improvements.
Appreciate that. I had suggested that we look at a threshold, and glad you came forward and offered up a compromise. At the last one, we had a really good discussion and talked about how we all want childcare. They're not all created equally. There's some really, really small ones and some huge ones and a number in between. So appreciate that. Let me turn it to colleagues and see where they are on this. Councilmember Jawanda.
Can we ask,
Jump in with just a slight clarification.
Yeah, before you do that,
Yeah.
I'm going to recognize my colleague, and then we'll turn it to planning after. Thanks.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you for doing the analysis. This is really helpful because I've raised like the point that you have large daycares that it wouldn't be an issue for. The one we have the United Therapeutics one on here, for example, which was 37 seats, and under this chart it says it was below the threshold, and there wasn't a require. I just want to make sure I'm understanding reading the chart the right way. Is that under the is that below the threshold under the change, or below? It was currently under the threshold.
On the spreadsheet attached to this packet, all of these where it says exempt or not exempt, that is under the current threshold.
Got it. Okay.
Right, 20 or the current, or if it was before 2020, that threshold, which was 50 vehicle trips.
Right,
or
and
50.
This one is 2022, so it's not before that.
Right, so it would be
This was under the 30.
So in this specific case, the daycare space came out of an existing use, so you have to think about the net difference, which is shown in the column on the far right in the packet. So it was just 10.
It already existed.
Yeah. So it was just, they were just repurposing space, so it's 10. It's not. Yeah.
Got it. Okay, so that's kind of an outlier in that regard, as far because it was an existing.
It was a conversion of existing. So yeah, it's not just from scratch.
Right. But just also showing that that's good. I mean, like, we want that to happen, and under the current standard, they were able to do that, and it didn't require an extra test. We love United Therapeutics. I mean, they are of a size that they could probably, the test would be okay, So just something. So I'm just trying to understand. I appreciate the need for the analysis, but what I'm questioning is the need of the 30 to 50 change, whether there's a need, I'm not for the exemption. I wasn't last time. This data underscores that even further for me. But the question, why did we land on the 30 to 50? And were you going to comment on that as a clarification? So maybe this is a good point. So let me ask you first, and then I'll go to you. Yeah.
Council staff's initial recommendation was to go with the planning board's recommendation as the only LATR exemption that council staff was recommending we go with because of daycares operating on those thin margins. The committee had brought up a good point that, not all daycares are the same and are of different sizes. So this was an attempt to sort of thread that needle of treating, larger and smaller daycares, exempting smaller daycares while requiring LATR for larger daycares.
But the 50 number, that just kind of sounded like a good place to put it.
The 50 is based on the threshold of
the prior threshold.
Right. So finding where there was a natural break in the previous 8 years of the 30 applications, and finding where we could draw a difference between the small, basically applying a definition to small versus large daycares based on trips.
Sure, I just wanted to clarify, first on this recommendation that we were talking about net new trips for the 50. Okay, just to clarify that in the recommendation. And that
that would get to that point we were talking about, if there's already trips being
right.
generated. Yeah.
Yes. So for net new trips while we made a different recommendation, we think this is a good compromise that we worked with council staff to come up with. And planning is supportive of this recommendation as written in the staff report.
Thank you. Appreciate the consensus and the work in between meetings. Again, glad we took the time to have that staff level work take place. Let me turn it to Council Vice President Stewart.
Well, since planning just said they agreed with the staff, this may be a moot point, but I just wanted to kind of push back a little bit on the distinction between small and large, because we do have, like, Central NIA is a large one. Central NIA is working on the margins. So just because it's a large childcare facility does not mean it has a lot of money to do these things. And I think I would love more centronias throughout the county.
Amen.
You know, they are working with a specific population. They also have infant care rooms, which are really needed across the county. So I know planning said they were okay with the compromise, and this is all about compromise, but I think as we're characterizing this, I would ask gently that we no longer make a distinction between small and large and make an assumption that large daycare facilities, early child care facilities have money to pay for these studies.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I think you're right about that. I think that the distinction for me is the question of once you get to a certain point of size, the impact is significant. And so, yes, I think the county should think about, and the state should think about, and the federal government should think about all kinds of ways that we need to subsidize affordable childcare facilities and nonprofit childcare providers because we have a crisis in our country. But I do think we get to a certain point once they are at a certain size where it is hard not to acknowledge that the impact is significant and, you know, the test is reasonable to meet an adequacy standard. But I think your points are well taken, and here, I think there's a unanimous vote on we'd like to see more centronias and more organizations like them that are providing affordable childcare to communities in our county because we desperately need them and we need a lot more of them, and we've got a lot to figure out in order to make that happen. So it sounds like we have a 3-0 recommendation of the consensus. Appreciate the work to get there, and Gesundheit. And let's go to the next recommendation, the new exemptions for certain units.
Great. So while these previous two recommendations would be new exemptions for entire projects, not requiring the project to begin the LATR process at all, these two would be new exemptions, but only for certain units. Essentially, this works through the LATR proportionality process, where the required improvements, that the total dollar value of the number of improvements that would need to be made would be that total dollar value being calculated based on number of units. The number of units would change depending on the exemption. So there are two of these new exemptions. Recommendation 3.11A, which would expand the current off-site mitigation exemption for affordable housing units, which currently only includes mitigation payments, to include constructed improvements. And it would do this by adjusting the proportionality guide, and that the fact that these trips would still count towards the 50, or rather, if 30 vehicle trip threshold as approved by this committee. We'll package all of these recommendations and fix all the inconsistencies when we go to council. And then recommendation 3.11 would exempt multifamily units with 3 or more bedrooms in multifamily structures from off-site mitigation, construction, and payment. And it would do so in the same way as the affordable units. As noted in the recommendation text, these two recommendations are slightly different in that affordable housing units are currently exempt from mitigation payments, but not LATR payment improvements, while multifamily units with 3 or more bedrooms are not currently exempt from mitigation payments or LATR improvements. For some additional data and context on recommendation 3.12, the 3 or more bedrooms, council staff or planning staff provided a table with all of the units with 3 or more bedrooms that were delivered from 2018 to 2023. I'll note that there's a typo in the packet, just in the total sum at the bottom. Each of the years are correct, but the sum should be a total from all of these years of 570 units with 3 or more bedrooms, of a total of 10,891 units, for a 3-bedroom unit percentage of 5.2%. Some high-level analysis by council staff suggests that the impact of LATR improvements on development feasibility is particularly small for affordable housing and 3 or more bedroom unit exemptions. These exemptions only marginally reduce the basis of calculating LATR requirements. LATR requirements in total, while certainly a cost on development, do not constitute a significant portion of development costs in the total capital stack. And a note on the affordable housing recommendation, the current mitigation payment exemption for affordable housing does not impact local transportation adequacy in the direct vicinity, at least not necessarily, and likely will not, just based on how mitigation payments are spent. So by exempting these units across both recommendations would reduce the adequacy of local transportation facilities. Council staff therefore suggests the committee does not approve recommendations 3.11A and 3.12.
All right, let me turn it to colleagues, and we can also turn it to planning as well if we want to hear from them on this. We did hear from them last time, and we did have quite a bit of conversation. Let me turn to Councilmember Joanda.
Sure, yeah, and appreciate again the analysis and going back and looking at these. As I talked about last time, I was, as Council President will remember, I've been a big proponent of the 3 bedrooms. I think we all are. It's unfortunate that a lot of them aren't happening as much as we would like. And I've said this kind of, the layering of all of these reductions just has a cumulative effect. Obviously, this is another one that's saying is relatively small, so I would agree with council staff that, just to not exempt these. Again, we love affordable housing, and we want more multifamily with 3 bedroom. That is not an issue here, but it's not preventing this being built, but this would have an impact on potentially these tests and this adequacy in the public facilities, as was mentioned. So I think I agree with council staff.
Thank you. Councilmember Fani Gonzalez.
I also agree with Councilmember Joanda on this one. I mean, is there something else that you guys were thinking of that I can't think of right now, because the difference is so tiny, getting into all this for such a marginal difference?
Yeah, it is. So one of the things that we discussed with MCDOT, this is specifically for the affordable housing units, not for the 3 bedrooms. But the idea for the affordable housing units was that we could create a new capital improvement project fund that could be seeded in part with mitigation payments from other developments, and that money could then if you're a developer or builder of an affordable housing project, they would be able to take advantage of and use those funds to construct additional improvements so that they can take advantage of the already being on the ground and mobilized.
Is this new information? This fund is new information, right? Because I didn't read that anywhere.
So council staff received this recommendation in the previous week from planning staff, but did not have the time to evaluate it, the feasibility of this request, as it would have a number of fiscal and budget. I mean, so this would operational. We can go to the slide. We do have a slide that presents this text. Should the committee wish to consider it, it's down there. This would be something that we've had preliminary conversations with MCDOT, and this is it. And OMB to assess the feasibility. That this is something that is maybe possible, but is relatively.
All right, I got to be honest. I think everybody's taken some liberties here. Frankly, this is the adequate public facilities ordinance. This is the growth and infrastructure policy. I think that some of the suggestions for working groups and task force to look at other things prospectively down the road, some of the suggestions of other ways we could theoretically accomplish through other mechanisms is really not what's before us. And I just think we have to be true to the policy decisions that we have before us. We are here to discuss the growth and infrastructure policy. And I think we have gotten into a habit recently in inserting unrelated language into documents where they're really not mechanisms to handle that type of public policy. It's not to say I don't agree with everything that's in this recommendation. I do. I have literally been arguing it in every discussion that we have had here, that I think it is the public's responsibility to subsidize behaviors that are in the public interest when we don't believe that it can be assumed by those who are doing things like childcare or things like affordable housing. But I think to say that we're not going to do it here for the reasons that we're not going to do it, but don't worry, we're going to come up with a blue ribbon task force to figure something out down the road later is just not an appropriate thing to include in this type of public policy from my perspective. So I'm speaking for myself, not for colleagues, but I just, agree with this. I have advocated for this, but I just think we're getting really far afield of what this policy is and what it isn't. And I am just concerned that we're starting to have very specific statutory obligations that we have turn into catch-alls for everything that we theoretically like to see happen in other places and no real mechanism to make it happen. And that's just not, I think, the appropriate way for us to legislate and for us to do land use. So I appreciate the effort here, but I just don't think, from my perspective at least, this is the right way to go. I think we make a decision on whether or not an adequacy test is appropriate and reasonable and in the public interest, and we stand by that decision. And I'm fine to go with colleagues that I agree with council staff on that. I don't know if colleagues wanted to speak to the bullet. So yeah. So okay, appreciate it. So we are going to agree with council staff. We are not going to agree on these with strong agreement on the rationale, but believing that the mechanism is not the right mechanism to accomplish it. Let's move on to the final piece here, which is extending the existing exemption, which we talked about at length. We had some conversation on the periphery of this policy of, what should or shouldn't be included, and so I'll turn it to council staff.
Thank you. There is one complete LATR exemption included in the GIP that was created in 2020. This is an exemption for bioscience facilities that was granted in the 2020 to 2024 GIP on a temporary basis to address economic strains caused by the COVID-19 pandemic and to allow the bioscience industry to build out or expand facilities more quickly. This existing exemption applies to projects or building permits approved, or rather applications submitted after January 1st, 2021 and before January 1st, 2025. So this exemption is about to expire. Therefore, the planning board recommended extending this bioscience LATR exemption for another 4 years. So it applies to applications filed before January 1st, 2029. And this recommendation also included to remove the exemption's current 3-year time limit to file a building permit. So basically the current exemption, you have to, within 3 years of filing your application, file a building permit for your exemption to be valid. During its September 23rd discussion, the committee requested some additional data, but was generally in supportive of extending this exemption, but asked council staff to work with planning staff to develop a recommendation for a new building permit filing timeline rather than completely removing the time limit altogether. So on the data end, the planning board approved 2 bioscience facility projects between 2018 and 2020 and 6 projects since 2020. 2 of the post-2020 projects have utilized the LATR exemption. There was a request from the committee to determine how effective this exemption has been. That's frankly difficult to determine just given the number of applications to determine any sort of causality, although 2 projects have utilized the exemption. Council staff worked with planning staff to develop new language, which would keep the first sentence of the recommendation to extend this to January 1st, 2029, but instead of removing the time limit, would, quote, change the exemption's current 3-year time limit to file a building permit to a 5-year time limit. The 5-year time limit would align with the 5-year adequate public facilities validity period as established in county code, and address some of the issues raised by bioscience facility developers while still requiring a modest time limit to file a building permit on the LATR exemption. So council staff suggests the committee support this change to recommendation 3.14.
Appreciate that. Councilmember Joanna?
So there would 5 years. It would not. Last time we said we got to come back to it in 4. We made it for what was the change from last time to this time? In addition to the 5 years, is there any other change in the language, or are you just moving it from 4 to 5 years?
From 3 to 5.
I'm sorry, from 3 to 5 years.
That,
but everything else is the same.
The planning board is recommending no time limit.
Right. No, I know that. But what you're proposing is what we did last time, but from 3 to 5 years.
Right.
Is that?
Right, so that would remain the same.
With the 2029 expiration. All right, and it is that I'm fine with that. It's I think again the pandemic's always a little weird. I will be looking to see like what happens over the next 5 years. It's interesting to note that of the ones that move forward, only 2 used it, and the others moved forward without using the exemption. So they did the LATR study. So again, that is we should maybe inquire about whether it's necessary in that regard, because, but I'm okay to go with consensus of the body, and as long as we're not doing it in an unlimited fashion. But I will say to planning and other folks, let's just really hone in on, even if we can get some, talk to some of these folks, and maybe we get MCDC to do that, or just ask like what's going into the factors. But we certainly want to encourage this, so.
I will also note, and I should have noted this before, that the 4 that did not use it were either below the LATR threshold or were in the White Flint Special Taxation District and are exempt from LATR anyway.
Okay, so there you go. That's important. Okay,
Yes.
good. Well, I feel even better about it then. All right.
So I appreciate the council staff recommendation to put the 5-year time limit on it, although I'm not really sure what that accomplishes, to be honest. I mean, I think we're trying to send a message here that we want bio, that we want investment, that we want this to come forward. I frankly don't think that a timeline that we set here is going to dictate their timing. I think this was framed as this will incentivize them to move forward with their approval. The only thing that is going to incentivize bio from moving forward once they choose to come here, which is a big question. I think the symbolism that we arrive here matters in that, even more than perhaps even the cost and the complication of an LATR test, is science. When is their trial completed? And what are they approved for by the FDA? Whether we put a 5-year, a 3-year, a 20-year, a 10-year, a 7-year, our timeline is not what they're focused on. It's their approval timeline and the science and the trials timeline. Now, whether they choose to have their facility in Montgomery County or Frederick County, whether they choose to go to Research Triangle or Montgomery County, whether they choose to go to Utah or to Cambridge, I do think that has an impact. And so I would support the planning recommendation as it came forward without the time limit. I don't think the time limit is going to make much of a difference anyway. And I think it sends the wrong message to the biohealth community internationally, where we have aggressively tried to send the opposite message. And I think we've been successful in sending that opposite message. And I think counteracting that for a benefit that I don't even really see and is not particularly clear to me in the interests of some level of compromise, I just don't think, this is another example where on the other end, I don't think the juice is worth the squeeze. I heard from a colleague before on the last one, I'm not sure the juice is worth the squeeze. Why do the exemption if it's not going to make a difference? In this case, why put a time limit on this that goes beyond the timing here anyway, when it just sends the wrong signal and doesn't really incentivize or move up a timeline in any meaningful way. So I would not agree with the council staff recommendation, although I do appreciate the effort to come up with a compromise, and I would support the recommendation as it was sent over from planning. Councilmember Funny Gonzalez.
I actually agree with the council president on this one. The council vice president Stuart and I went to Taiwan with the county executive, 2 different trips, making sure that we have Montgomery County be the #1 place in the nation for life sciences, and we should do everything possible to take red tape away. The limitation really makes little difference, if at all. So I'm going to agree with the planning board on this one.
All right, so that'll be 2-1. Councilmember Jawando preferred council staff recommendation with the 5-year time limit, and Councilmember Funny Gonzalez and I agreed with the planning board recommendation, so that's a 2-1 recommendation. And I don't believe there is anything else left as a discussion or decision point before us. I'll turn it over to council staff to explain the process moving forward.
Sure, thank you. So we've been creating a table that provides what, the current rule is related to each of the planning board's recommendations, and where the committee has landed in its preparation to go to the full body. And so we'll be able this afternoon to complete that table. We had these pieces that were the follow-up today that were remaining to place in there, but we'll get that finished. We'll get that table out by the end of today. And then the next piece of this whole thing is that the GO committee will be taking up impact taxes. That starts on the 10th, so Thursday of this week. We'll probably go to the 17th as well. But we will also start the full council work sessions for the GIP starting next Tuesday, where we won't get into the impact tax information. That will come late, but we will start to go through the school's recommendations and the transportation recommendations a week from tomorrow. So what we'll be presenting will be the committee's recommendations moving forward. But I also want to thank planning staff. They've been amazing and exceedingly helpful every time we've needed questions answered or data, mapping, anything. They've been right there, and we're really fortunate to have them with us and providing all that information. So thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you to planning staff and to the planning board chair. Thank you to Department of Transportation for your work. Thank you to our budget and finance teams who have also helped as well and consulted on these issues. Really appreciate everybody's interest and engagement on this, and appreciate the fact that we are working through this policy in a deliberative and thoughtful way. So look forward to the related conversations at the Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Committee. We have the Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Chair with us. We appreciate her joining us as well. And with that, colleagues, we are adjourned.